Okay, so the next section for TA southbounders is Havelock or Nelson to St. Arnaud, and this is a long section through the Richmond Ranges, so I tried my best, but I'm struggling with editing it down into a smaller video, so I apologize for how long this video is going to be, but there's one, a lot of information about the Richmond Ranges I want to convey, and two, there is also just so many beautiful scenic views up there that I'm just really struggling with editing it down. So it is going to be a longer video. I'm going to try to impart as much wisdom and information as I can. I use that term wisdom lightly, but let's just get into it. So the first day, you can take that bus, as you saw in prior scenes, back to Havelock. If you did stay in Nelson, it will drop you off right in the town so you can connect your steps. And when you leave the town, you start off on a busy highway, but quickly it junctions off into this more kind of peaceful farm track slash two-track walking. And this kind of area, I don't think we saw one car the entire time we were walking this. It kind of is more roundabout. You could essentially follow that state highway or that busy road all the way up to where the trail will reconnect into. One, I wouldn't recommend it because it is a very busy road, and two, also it's not the quote-unquote official route. Again, you can do whatever's your choice is, your own prerogative here. I'm just trying to give you information. So when you continue along this route, there are a couple bridges that you cross and creeks that you ultimately cross. I wouldn't try to filter some of that water. It would be hard to get down those embankments as you see there. So I would recommend packing out water from the town of Havelock. So you get into this track here called Dalton's Track. And Dalton's Track is very, very scenic, as you see beautiful mountain ranges around you. But the quality of the track really kind of depends on whose farm pasture you're going through. I've said that in past videos on the North Island, and it remains true for this part of the South Island. It really does remind you like kind of your North Island. It's like a final goodbye to what you've been doing a lot on the North Island and kind of a welcome to the fullness of the South Island. So the farm pasture really just kind of depends who's owning the property, where the cattle are, what's grazing through it. Sometimes there is nice single track through there that other hikers have beaten down. Sometimes you just go from orange post to orange post. Again, very dependent. You do cross another creek in here. This one can get deeper in portions. Just be very careful with that crossing. And then you just kind of hug the edge of these farmers' fields. It does get thicker, as you can see here. Again, depending on your season, depending on the crop growing cycle of the farmers there, it will vary on how thick it is. It is thick enough that it kind of slows your pace down, but overall a lot of this day is road, so you can really average out that slower mile pace when you go through these farm pastures. As you can see here, a lot of styles, like I've said before. Get used to those, one for the North Island and just two overall for New Zealand itself. Ultimately, this trail will end and it will lead you into a forested section of trail, and this is the end here, and this forested section will bring you into a place called Pelorus Bridge. So Pelorus Bridge is also a place that you can camp, you can send resupply boxes to. It's kind of a privatized campground. Excuse me, I think it is DOC campground. But Google that if you want more information on that. I kept this piece of film coming up here long, just solely so I can tell you the information about it. The inner city bus will pick you up from Pelorus Bridge area to bring you into Nelson. So this is the crossing of Highway 6. Where Nelson is straight down that road that I just pointed at, Havelock's down that road. So if your miles link up and you want to get closer and more forward momentum before going into the official city of Nelson, if you want to go there, you can schedule the bus to pick you up there. If not, you can also walk to here and pick up a resupply box if you decided to send that ahead. So once you finish up that, you start this longer road walk to ultimately connect you into the fullness of the Richmond Ranges. And this road walk, very exposed, so bring more water than you would require normally, but I say that with the caveat in there that you also end up passing this place right here where this farmer has installed a sink, so they actually do give you access to water, which is very, very nice of them. It would be a really dry road walk without that until the very end of that road walk. So it does kind of fluctuate. It is New Zealand after all, and I've said this in many videos. It's very roller coastery. The video clips I've got in here make it look flat, and there certainly are portions of flat area, but ultimately you're doing these micro ups and downs through these little kind of pockets of land. So this is the water I was talking about. Once you get closer to the trailhead proper, you pass like 3 or 4 waterfalls that are very beautiful, and if you do need a natural source, that's where you can get it. So I kept this piece of film super long because it shows you the time splits, and it shows you how long they estimate that a kilometer is going to take you. Sometimes they estimate that kilometer is going to take you right underneath an hour, and you can look at that and say, oh, there's no way I'm only going to do 0.6 miles about in an hour. Sometimes it's actually true. Again, a lot of those time split boards on the North Island, you usually can like shave off time from that pace, but the Richmond Ranges are a special beast. When you see those time split boards, almost guarantee that you may shave off 10 minutes, 20 minutes, somewhere in that ballpark, but almost guarantee those time splits are going to be close to it because you just really cannot move fast. So there's a camp spot past the trailhead, half a mile in, mile in. It can fit 2-3 tents. So if you so desire, you can camp there. And it's nice to be able to have a wild camp there if you don't want to push all the way to the hut. A lot of people do stay at the Polaris Bridge I mentioned earlier just to make the day easier so they can get to a hut the day after they leave. But we didn't coordinate that. We didn't have that information. So again, that's why I just impart, not wisdom, information. So get used to these types of bridges. Get used to these types of bridges, not only for the Richmond Ranges, ultimately for all the South Island. You can see directly below your feet, so if you have a fear of heights, just go slow on them. They are built very sturdily. I think they use steel in the construction. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know, but they are very sturdily built, so get prepared for that. So Emerald Pools is a very scenic spot off trail, and as you see, it's only 2 minutes there. We got a lot of flack for not going there, but we were in go mode. I would recommend going there, even though I'm preaching do what I say and not what I do. But we heard a lot of varying reports that it was worth the trip, and we kind of wish that we went there. We did get a lot of flack for not going there. So as you get past that, you will start climbing more, and the ascent gets more steep. It's no longer these kind of micro ups and downs, but more of a prolonged ascent. And as you see, we're descending here. There are a few of those micro ups and downs that lead ultimately to a long ascent. And along this way, you kind of have the river to your left, and the trail is just very slow because of these rocks, these roots. Going to be an ongoing flavor all throughout the Richmond Ranges until you hit this first hut called Captain's Hut. And this is the first hut in the Richmond Ranges for the TA Southbounder route, and it can fit anywhere from 6 to 8 folks, can fit way more people out camping. I would highly recommend bringing sandfly deterrent into the Richmond Ranges, because we sat out there for about 5 minutes to take a lunch spot, and we were absolutely swarmed by sandflies. Again, recommend getting specifically sandfly deterrent. DEET will work, or some type of other repellent, insect repellent, but they do make a special product just for sandflies in New Zealand. So I kept this piece of film in here because I just wanted to show you the sheer amount of folks that stay at the huts here, and also just how many TA Southbounders there are in general. Those hut books you do sign when you stay there to let people know, the DOC that manages these areas, how many folks are coming through, that you have your backcountry hut pass, and all that good stuff. So once you leave Captain's Hut, you start more of those micros ups and downs. I apologize, I thought the ascent was in there, but the ascent's later. You cross more of these bridges, and these bridges, again, maximum load 1 person, you can see through them. Gonna really have to get used to it. I personally have a somewhat little fear of heights still, and it still made me nervous. You do get used to it. They are sturdy. You can rely on them. I didn't hear any stories of them breaking. I don't even know why I would say that, but ultimately they are very sturdy. So this is more of the track quality that really hampers your pace. But I put this in here. Really appreciate this day no matter where you camp the day prior, because this is going to be your quote-unquote easiest day in the Richmond Ranges. So the next hut is Mitty's hut. And Mitty hut, again, 8 people, about 6 to 8, a lot of camping outside, and after Mitty's hut is when the full ascent begins. Along the way you were doing those river miles, which were the micro ups and downs I mentioned, but after Mitty's hut you have this full ascent up to a hut called Rock's hut, and this one is a long, steep ascent. As you can see here, a lot of roots, a lot of rocks. It will impact your pace. It's actually one of the quote-unquote easier climbs again in the Richmond Ranges. And I say easier again with quotes because you still are going to be outputting a lot of effort. It's just there's not a whole lot of technical stuff in the aspect of you have to make sure you're not falling off the side of a cliff. So you can cruise on up that. And this is Rock's hut. It is a very big hut. I think it's a 20 bunker. Again, Google me if I am incorrect on that point. They have water accessible, beautiful porches, and yeah, it's a bigger hut, and you start seeing more of these bigger huts. The Richmond Ranges, just do your research on what height you're going to, and it will tell you how many bunks it does provide. Again, here's the time split. I kept it long to show you just how serious they take these time splits. So the track after that hut, Rock's Hut, it's pretty good for the next mile or two, kind of just like slowly ascends overall. Again, I say overall because it does have those micros, but overall it just kind of slowly ascends, not as steeply as the first ascent to Rock Hut, but you still do gain some elevation. And I wanted to really talk on this point here. As you're getting close to the quote-unquote top of this climb, it starts getting more brushy, and at the very, very top, like when you're at the top of the elevation profile line, there is a junction. And I ended up losing Magpie here because the more beaten down track ends up going to the left, and the less beaten down track, which is actually the track, goes off to the right. And as you can see, it's very overgrown, so it's hard to like know what's animal use path, what's hiker track. So stay on your R's and W's with your maps for this. I apologize, P's and Q's. I kept this slow-mo because I believe this is the junction where Magpie got lost. The track is to the right here, and as you see, the more beaten down path is right directly ahead of you to the left. So really stay on top of it. This is the top, and once you get up here, you ultimately start a steep descent. Check your knees. Your knees might be hurting at the end of this day. And the steep descent will bring you to this kind of plateau, tabletop land. Very windy through here, but very, very beautiful, epically gorgeous through here. So maybe even if you're staying at Browning Hut, which is the next hut, get up there for a sunset, because I can imagine it would just be absolutely gorgeous. So if it's very windy, you will be kind of leaning into the wind, but the tabletop lands don't last forever. It's about a half-mile long, and then it drops you back into forested portion, and the forested portion will bring you all the way ultimately to Browning's Hut. Right before Browning's Hut, you start hitting these washout portions, and you can navigate them pretty easily. Sometimes you just have to go more roundabout than you would prefer. You can't cut straight across. As in this one, I point here, to cut straight across, it's too steep to get up that bank, and we would have to go around it. Sometimes the video can't capture how steep those banks are in person, but you wouldn't be able to get up that type of washout. So this is Browning Hut, a smaller hut, and we actually ended up sharing it with another hiker, but it's only a 8-person hut, I believe, with the mattresses. So again, a lot of camping outside, but if you're planning on staying at the hut, would recommend getting to these huts earlier than you would prefer. So next day, we ended up going to Old Man Hut Junction, and along the way, there's a lot of places to camp. A general rule in the Richmond Ranges is that most people decide to go from hut to the 2 huts away, and that will generally give you an overall kind of standard day. If you end up going 2 huts past, then that's, again, what most people end up doing. So once you leave Browning Hut, you start a mile or two of kind of what I want to call cross country that will get you to Hackett's Hut. And this cross country is a river track. As you saw with the sign prior, there is a high water alternate, but I'm pointing here how washed out that is. I personally feel more comfortable in the river than on top of this loose kind of soil and rock to the right. Again, it comes down to personal preference, opinion. I really enjoyed the river portion because it was kind of just full adventure, kind of rock scrambly. And again, I feel more comfortable in water than I do on steep, loose gravel. But it comes down to your opinion. You can take either route. I would recommend the river route, but it's your prerogative. So after a couple of those river miles, you keep crossing back and forth, back and forth. Again, I push out the kind of washout here. I believe the track's up that cliff somewhere, and it doesn't do it justice to film how steep that is. If you fall, you're gonna slide. You're not gonna really be able to sit back into that fall and just like tuck yourself into the hillside. You wait in the water for a little bit. That's part of the adventure. Also get used to it. South Island, especially South Island, is going to put you through many, 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 many rivers. So when you finish that river portion, it will bring you to this hut called Hackett Hut. And it's a smaller hut again, but a lot of people shoot for here if they ended up staying at Rock's Hut the day prior. And here it is, more camping options on the outside, nice flat ground. And this is kind of where you start officially climbing into the Richmond Ranges proper, at least in my opinion. This is where you start getting into that alpine environment, that very scenic area. I did slow-mo here to show you the time splits again, and you may be able to shave some time off them. They are pretty accurate for the Richmond Ranges. It'll take you a while. It will take you a while to do this climb. To get up to Starville Hut, it is a prolonged climb, a few thousand feet of elevation gain, anywhere in the ballpark from 1,000 to 2,000. First, you'll end up crossing this here river, and yeah, multiple times. Again, flavor of the South Island especially, they like to make you go back and forth across river sides and river banks. So filter water there because it is a dry ascent, besides one key creek that I will talk about when we end up passing that creek. But once you leave the riverbed, it is a dry ascent until that creek and then ultimately Starville Hut itself. So I kept these portions long just to kind of show you the flavor of the river miles. They really vary dependent on the river itself and the geological formations of the rock. So sometimes the river miles are easy, sometimes a little more difficult. So this is where the ascent starts. Get ready. Get ready to climb. Get ready to climb for pretty much all of the South Island, but especially the Richmond Ranges. They like to put you straight up a mountain, straight down the backside. So this is the longer ascent here, and I tried to do it justice again. Film doesn't really capture how steep some of these grades are. If you decide to experience it, you'll be able to find out. So you do plateau a little bit before you hit ultimately the creek that signifies you're about in the last mile until Starville Hut. And I wanted to point the creek out because Starville Hut does sometimes have water issues. This is not the final creek, this is a little bit before. But Starville Hut sometimes does not have a lot of water capacity in the tank for some reason. I'm assuming because a lot of people stay there. So I wanted to point out these creeks because if you're a thru hiker especially, again, it's opinion here, but if you're a thru hiker, do what you can because a lot of the time there are day hikers, section hikers that might not be in the same shape as you and are relying on that water at the hut. So this is the creek right before Starville Hut. Recommend filling up there. Just do your part so you can conserve the water at these huts. And they do have these informational pieces about which huts tend to have less water. So whenever you see that, again, it's your own prerogative here, own position, own opinion, but I would recommend just doing your part and carrying water if you can. So this is Starville Hut, epically gorgeous hut. We did not poke our head in, but there's some camping spots outside, and this is kind of the view you have out the back. And you start more of an ascent from Starville. It's less prolonged and steeply up, but it does still have steep portions. So your pace overall this day, I want to say generously, you're going to be holding a 2 mile per hour pace, even maybe in that 1.5 mile per hour. Again, it's just very slow going. It's not so much technical this first day, but it's just very slow going with the twists and turns, the rocks and roots, and all the elevational change. So the technical days will be in your future. And again, this is why I struggled with cutting down these films here, because just everywhere you look, especially after you get past Starville Hut, your days are just going to be gorgeous non-stop. And every so often you will pop down into forested section to connect into the next kind of ridge line. And then as you see, go straight back up, flavor of the Richmond Ranges. But it is well worth it because you see these broad sweeping views and it's just gorgeous. So this is the next hut. I'm blanking on the name. I believe it might be Royal Hut. But that hut, there's a lot of hikers that stay there as well. Again, the water situation can vary, so do your research for the water at that hut as well. But a lot of hikers were there when we got there, like 20 hikers. So it is a very popular hut. Stay there if you will, if your miles link up, what have you. We wanted to go a little bit farther, chew into some more miles, because these Richmond Ranges, you never know how fast you're going to go. You really cannot anticipate what the next section holds. It is always a mystery of why you're going to be going so slow. So really cannot anticipate how fast you'll go. If you want a broad stroke of how fast you'll go, I would even say mile to mile and a half for the entirety of the day. So just get used to that. You're going to be going slow. Unless you decide to run it, which you are crazy. So after leaving that hut, you kind of do these kind of small tabletop roller coasters. And to get to this point, I wasn't able to film the ascent, but it is a steep drop down, and then I think 500 or 600 feet just straight up this hillside to the right. You can't even see where it drops, but I'm pointing, you run that tabletop, and then you drop straight down and come right back up. If you are in an emergency, it looks like there's a rain tank at the top of that climb. I would not personally rely on this. Again, it comes down to your preference and your own comfortability with water carries. So once you get to that top, you think you're done. If you look at your elevation map and your elevation profiles, you're like, oh, it's easy. It is not. Be very fearful in the Richmond Ranges when you see an elevation profile map that says quote unquote flat or like very small 50-foot gains, whatever it may be. those, in my opinion, again, are the hardest parts of the Richmond Ranges. It's not the long ascents, not the long descents. It's these very concentrated ups and downs that, quote unquote, on an elevational map look very flat. So there's a hut located here that's about 600 meters down off trail called Old Man's Hut. We did not want to kind of bite that bullet per se, so we ended up pushing past. There is a camp spot right before Little Rintle Mountain. It can fit 2 or 3 tents. You will have to carry your own water here from the hut prior to Old Man's, unless you want to do that off trail and back. But it is a good position to get you ready for the next day, because this upcoming day is gonna be something truly special. Get prepared. So this day is where the Richmond Ranges really start to have technical pieces of hiking. The last portion was slower, just kind of chunkier trail, but it didn't really have portions, in my opinion, of what I would consider technical hiking. These days do. So once you get to Old Man Hut, that's really when kind of they start to change. You still have a lot of ascents and descents. That's kind of the flavor overall. But you start getting more into these really kind of rock fields and stuff you kind of have to twist and turn around. So if you do camp there, the beginning of your day will be climbing this mountain called Little Rintle. And Little Rintle, if it is foggy at the base, it will burn off. Again, check your weather forecast beforehand. There is very small amount of service in the tree line right before you get up to here. I would highly recommend not going up to the Rintles in bad weather. 1, very probably unsafe, and 2, it would just be extremely uncomfortable, slow going. So cannot recommend that enough. Try to time this and make sure you time it on a good weather day. So when you get closer to the top of Little Rintle, you have these broad sweeping views. By far one of our favorite views of the Richmond Ranges. This is what I mean by technical. Again, it's not too bad. It's not like class 3, class 4 climbing. You do have to usually have 3 points of contact in some areas, but if you do fall, it's just going to be extremely uncomfortable. You will not die. You will just be more beat up than you would prefer. So this is the top of Little Rintle, and you can see Big Rintle off to the right there. And then you start this kind of steep descent, and the track grade really kind of fluctuates on the way to Big Rintle or just Rintle Mountain. Sometimes it's nice single track that you can really hold a pace, and then it just gets really, really steep. Again, there's Big Rintle or just Rintle Mountain in front of Magpie there, and you're just going straight down into that valley, not valley, but kind of connecting piece up to the top. Very slow going. Again, if you fall here, it's just more uncomfortable. You're not going to slide down that slope. The camera might make it look steeper than it is in that portion. And this is a big pinch point for hikers. There's this rock wall that you have to have 4 points of contact on. And this is what I mean by technical. This is probably the, in my opinion, sketchiest part of the Richmond Ranges. I'm showing you an alt you can do here. The alt will take really long. It's just an alt that I created because I didn't personally feel comfortable with that 4 points of contact. It's longer, but you can safely get down, and it'll just take you a little bit longer. So if you hit that pinch point and are uncomfortable, know that you can pick and choose a way around. It just will be longer than you prefer. So then you climb up Rintle proper, and the track, it's a very steep climb, but the track grade is pretty good. I would say Little Rintle, in just kind of a broad scope, is harder hiking wise than Big Rintle itself, because Little Rintle is more jagged. Again, it comes down to opinion, comes down to preference, but in my opinion, I thought Little Rintle was more difficult than Rintle itself. So this is the top of Rintle Mountain. Take a break, take a photo. It is absolutely gorgeous up there, very scenic. And I don't know if it was our timing or what, but the wind wasn't hitting us too hard up there, so that would have been another factor to play. If it was very windy up there, it would have been more uncomfortable for some of those kind of slower, steeper sections. So again, take a photo. I'm not saying anything important here. I'm just probably exclaiming on how stoked I am to be on top of such a cool mountain. So as you drop down the backside, that little line that I'm pointing to right there is the actual trail. It looks far more aggressive than it is. It looks like it's just cut straight into the face when you're on top. Don't get too worried about it. Don't let the nerves kind of build up. For me, I was a little worried. This is what you could see that I had pointed out prior. It is very steep, but it's not it's not steep enough that if you fall, you're just sliding completely down the mountain. It will require patience. It will require footwork. It'll take you a little bit longer, but don't get too worried when you see it from the top of Rintle. It looks far worse than it is. So once you get up and over, you start descending into the Rintle Hut. and I'm pointing out where the trail goes ultimately. That's Purple Mountain in the distance. You do have another climb. Again, it's the flavor. Very steep descent. Many people will do the rentals in a day and just stay at this hut, from hut to hut, because it will take you anywhere in the ballpark of 3, 4, 5 hours, depending on your pace, to do about 3 miles, I think, even probably a little less. It will be that 1 mile per hour, if not lower pace. So this is the top of Purple Mountain. I didn't film a whole lot climbing up. It was super windy for us. And you can see rental that I just pointed at there in the distance. The climb up this is far easier than the rentals. Very well graded. Track quality is pretty excellent. So if you are wanting to push past the rental hut, know that this you can actually hold a pretty standard kind of mountaineering pace, not mountaineering, but climbing pace on. 2 miles per hour, 2.5 in some portions. If you're feeling really good for it, maybe even 3. So you drop down the backside of Purple Mountain, and it's just broad sweeping views, as you can see, just gorgeous. Again, I apologize for how long this video is going to be. 1, there's just so much information jam-packed into the Richmond Ranges, and 2, it's just scenes upon scenes upon scenes over and over again. So you pass the 1900 kilometer mark somewhere in the forest. As you see, Magpie was somewhat stoked. I gave her thumbs up, but she seemed okay about it. So congratulate yourself, take a photo, do what you need. And then you start more of the descent and ascent. You can see it's just slow going. This stuff is not super sketchy, just very slow going. And it will take you a little longer than you prefer. That's Tarn Hut. A little bit of an older hut, a lot of camping options around it. And if you decide to push past it, you start kind of an easier portion of trail. I would think Tarn Hut to mid Wairo Hut, again, opinion here, was probably part of one of the easiest portions of the Richmond Ranges. For us, it was just overall easy track. A lot of steep ascents, descents, but overall it was like cut well. It didn't really have any landslides. It was just like pretty cruisy to move on. So once you hit this bridge, it will kind of signify that you're getting close to mid Wairo Hut. It's another half mile, maybe less, 0.3 across this bridge. And mid Wairo Hut, again, is a smaller hut, and it doesn't have a whole lot of flat spots to camp. I didn't film the hut this night. We were just kind of beat down and ready for camp and some food. But the hut is small. There's about 3 to 4 flat spots. You could pitch more tents in this large grassy area, but you're not going to be sleeping super flat. So if you do want the flatter spots to camp, I'd recommend getting there earlier than later. Here's the spot I was mentioning. So that was the hut. Very quick piece of footage. I apologize, just didn't film it. When you leave Top Wairo Hut, this, I think, is the hardest part of the Richmond Ranges. Again, it comes down to opinion, preference, whatever. But from mid Wairo Hut to Top Wairo Hut is quote-unquote river track, and I believed it was the hardest portion. Technically, just like pace-wise, everything comes into play here. It is just very washed out portions of track, and when it's not washed out, you're doing this kind of cliffy scrambling stuff that you're either having to have 3 points of contact, 4 points of contact. As you see here, it's hard to capture and film how narrow that trail is, but it's so narrow that you take one step, secure your foot, take the next step, secure your foot. It's very, very slow going. And again, it's very hard to show and film that the left side, if you do fall, it's going to be a fall that you don't prefer to have. So you just got to go extremely, extremely slow. Again, I kept a lot of these clips in here because I wanted to convey, again, from my opinion, how slow and how hard this chunk of trail was. It will take you very long. It's just steeply up these rocks, steeply down these rocks. Really, I thought at points that I would just walk in the river. It would have been easier. You just have to hold on to points. It's very tight. You kind of have to contort your body around some of these rocks. Very slow going. So if you get to mid Wairo Hut late, I cannot heavily recommend against it enough to not push on to Top Wairo Hut, even though it's only anywhere from 3 to 4 miles away. Those 3 to 4 miles will take you quite a while. And you will get stung by bees. You can't see it yet, but there are a lot of hornets in the surrounding area. So just be aware about that. When you crawl under some of these trees, Magpie got stung, I got stung. We've heard of other hikers that got stung. It is a very kind of dense populated with hornet nests and throughout that section. So this is more of that track quality I was talking about. Steep ups, steep downs. I think this scene does help convey it a little bit. I felt pretty sketchy just standing there and filming her because I was on a little ledge too. But it is very, I've said it many times, very slow going. Be prepared for that section to take you way longer than you anticipate. I think we were doing underneath a mile per hour. So you cross the river more than a few times within it too, kind of from bank to bank. And then once you officially get off the kind of riverside track that's on those cliff sides or those band sides, you start walking in the river more. And this is more of the calmer section. About a half mile before Top Wairo Hut, it gets quote unquote easier. It is easier. You're not going as slow, and you just cross the river multiple times. Again, I'm more comfortable with this stuff ultimately than this stuff right here when you're just hugging the side of the cliff or of the hill, whatever it may be. Really beautiful sections. The water, you got the river right next to you almost at all times, so you don't really have to worry about water per se from mid Wairo to Top Wairo Hut. Pardon my pronunciations on those, because you just cross it over and over again. This signifies the last crossing of this river that you'll have, and you go steeply up that hill to Magpie's right to get to Top Wairo Hut. And Top Wairo Hut, again, I didn't film the inside, but it's this bright orange hut, and you see it in a lot of TA hikers' photos because it just stands out so much. I didn't check out the inside. There's not a whole lot of camping on the outside, so again, recommend getting to these places earlier than later if you are trying to secure a bunk or a bed inside of those huts. Most people seem to get to these huts around 3 or 4 o'clock, and that's usually when they call their days, because if you push past that, sometimes you may not know how far you're going to get to the next hut. So right after Top Wairo, you do begin a long, prolonged ascent, and the ascent has these pockets of harder portions, as you see here, just very rocky. It's not technical. It's not a technical ascent. Just slower than a quote-unquote normal ascent would be, because you have to pick your way around these boulders. As you get nearer to the top, it does start kind of, I don't want to say leveling out, but the track itself gets easier to move across. Those big boulders become less. There's more kind of dirt patches that you can kind of secure your foot in, excuse me, and continue walking. So this is the big valley down below. You see where you came from, your past, your present, your future. That's really cool about the Richmond Ranges. You always get to see what you did earlier in the day and then what you're going to be doing ultimately for the remainder of the day. A lot of tussocks on the way up, and this is kind of the pseudo top. It puts you on this tabletop land, and you think you reached the official peak, but you still have some more climbing to do. It is more just those micro ups and downs. It's no longer that prolonged descent that you were doing earlier in the day, that steep one from Top Wairo Hut. Broad sweeping views, very windy up here. We ended up taking lunch up here and finding a wind-blocked rock, but if it's rainy and windy, it would be very uncomfortable up there. So once you get down the backside, you start kind of these connector portions. There's mostly tabletop land, really easy track quality. Really, honestly, after that hut, the track quality starts to shift the ratio. From the Old Man Hut to Top Wairo Hut, I believed was the most technical section, the longest, the hardest section of the Richmonds, and the ratio was like 90% hard to 10% quote-unquote easy. The ratio begins to shift after that. You do still have these like landslide portions, but they became pockets and not just consistent every single moment slow going. So you can start picking up your pace through here, start eating more miles if you so desire. So you'll end up getting to this little hut before Porter's, and I am blanking on the name, I apologize. Google it if you so desire. There's water right before this hut, before the climb up to here, so you can fill up there, do your part if you are staying there, and just carry water up. It's easy enough. So once you leave that hut, if you're shooting for Porter's, you have more of that chunky rock that I showed you, and then you have more of this quote-unquote easier track through this kind of dirt, kind of rock mixture. And it's a lot of micro ups and downs, so be prepared for that. As you can see, every piece of footage is either Magpie going up or going down. It is the Richmond Ranges. It's just very condensed elevation. I kept this piece of film super long. So as I said, the ratio changed. There's not as many hard portions, but there are still very slow portions. The camera cannot do it justice how steep this is and how unsecure your footing is on this. It is very, very pebbly sized, loose, I don't know a better word for it than scree, that you will slip on. I ended up having to go down on my butt because I felt like I was going to slip down that. The camera did not capture how steep it was, but you will have to go very slow on that type of stuff. So you top out on another climb before Porter's Hut, and this top of the climb kind of signifies your final descent into Porter's. Broad sweeping views, you get to see kind of the volcanic area that you've been walking through. The mud, I kept this scene in here just to show you there is still mud. It's not as much of a factor as it's been on the North Island for you. There are still very small pockets. It only gets about ankle high at the top. And you can see Porter's Hut in the distance. It's another bright orange one, so it's really visible to the eye. And Hunter's Hut was the past name. There you go. So this is Porter's Hut, and there is a lot of camping around here. So if you are shooting for there's a lot of these flat patches kind of behind the hut. We didn't get any water from the hut. Again, we carried to it. There was a creek right before the final ascent, or the final top, that you can fill up on. So I kept this scene in here because it shows you that it can get cold. Be prepared for all weather in the Richmond Ranges. Cannot stress that enough either. Be prepared for cold, wet, dry, hot, whatever it may be. It's just a very volatile mountain range. So when you leave Porter's Hut the next morning, you start this kind of more loose ups and downs, and that stuff is just really slow. Again, it's not so much technical as the portion was from Old Man's Hut to Top Wairo Hut. Just still slow. You're not going to be eating a pace anytime soon. Near the end of the day, you can start averaging it out, but the beginning portion will be slower. So you rock more of these forested areas, and ultimately you're shooting. Most people shoot for this place called Red Hills Hut, and Red Hills Hut is a very popular spot for TA hikers because, one, it kind of quote unquote signifies the end of the Richmond Ranges, because you have two options there. But I'll get into that once we get to the hut itself. The track quality, it keeps getting better. The closer you get to Red Hills Hut, the better the track quality gets. You'll start off doing slower miles, and then an hour you might be adding 0.1 onto your pace. Next hour adding 0.2, whatever it may be. There is one quote-unquote big obstacle here, and it's this. It's a cliffside that is really washed out, and you have to scramble up it. There are like couple seconds that you have to use 4 points of contact. Again, the camera doesn't really do justice to how steep it is. I would prefer going up it than down it. For TA Nobos, I was like, I don't know how they do it. Again, it is a very short portion. Just be very slow going and be careful as you climb that, because if you fall that, it will hurt. So after that, more of these micro ups and downs. You cross another riverbed. I don't foresee this river flooding. Again, check your weather forecast before going into the Richmonds, because it can change on a dime, and it can also impact your entirety of that hike through there. So you climb steeply out of that riverbed, and when you climb steeply out of it, track quality keeps getting better and better. You're getting closer to Red Hills Hut. I think from there, somewhere in the ballpark 4 to 5 miles, and these orange posts will just guide your way. I've talked about them in the past, but those orange posts are really your lifeline in the Richmond Range, especially when sometimes the track quality is not there. So this is the track quality as you get closer. On screen, it may look chunky, but it's really not that bad. Just beautiful, beautiful track, beautiful kind of views of the mountain ranges. I kept this one slow-mo because I just really love this scene here. It kind of shows you the orange post, it kind of shows you Magpie, shows you the mountains you've been doing, kind of the full flavor of it. So that little U or V in the land is where Red Hut is located. You have this kind of open tussock field right before you get there, and that signifies your quote-unquote completion of the Richmond Ranges. I kept this scene super long because the quote-unquote official track goes off to the right, towards Top House Road, but the old TA route goes down the road to the left to Red Hills Car Park. So you have an option there. Some people decide to do the official track, some people decide to do the Red Hills Car Park track. We decided to do the Red Hills Car Park track. I'm pointing at the official track there. Red Hills Car Park is to the left. We decided to do that track because it's about the same mileage, but it's just you can hold a pace more standard on this and kind of anticipate the time of arrival in town. You just steeply descend down to the car park itself. All good 2-track, mostly good single track. There's a confusing junction. Just take the easy track. You've already done enough hard stuff in the Richmond Ranges, and it will put you into the road and take a sigh of relief. You did it. You got through the Richmond Ranges, and the road will ultimately lead you into the town of St. Arnaud. There's really only one spot to stay if you're staying at a motel in St. Arnaud called the Alpine Lodge. We stayed there. Almost every hiker stays there. I believe they have camping options, but we just got a room. A lot of people send their food box here so you can resupply and continue into the next section. Heavily recommend sending a food box here when you're on the North Island, because they only have one little corner store and it does not have that many options. I kept this scene long just to show you we were packing out like 5-6 days. There is a place called Boyle Outdoor Center about 80 miles from here that you should also send a box to. But again, it's your own prerogative, own preference. So yeah, give yourself a pat on the back. You survived this video as well as you survived the Richmond Ranges.